Let me start by thanking the Frederick Everett Stiftung and the New Rules for Global Finance for the invitation to participate in this project, and regret that I will not be able to be present in the panels themselves, which will have been enjoyable. Let me do an introduction to the general topic, and particularly to the issue of measurement and the implications for global cooperation, which is the topic of this session and on the whole seminar. So the rebirth of the issue of inequality in the global agenda, on top of the poverty agenda, which has been at the center of the international objectives, let's say, it has been a really a positive step. I was one of those who fought to include inequality in the SDGs. I actually had fought before, when I was in the UN, to include inequality in the MDGs, but I failed. So it has been a great and interesting satisfaction to see that the issue of inequality is explicitly included in the SDGs as SDG 10, to reduce inequality within and among countries. Now, this represents, in my view, a major step from the MDGs, which was more a poverty-reducing agenda. And one interesting feature of the new agenda is that it also includes developed countries, where some of the inequality trends have been particularly troublesome in recent decades. So I want to underscore also the very important work done by several institutions, and remarkably by the IMF in recent years, with Jonathan Ostry as a leader of that work, who will be present in this seminar. Let me also, of course, just highlight the importance of the academic literature that has come out in recent years, which is really a booming literature, which includes, of course, the bestseller by Piketty, but also the work by Francois Bourguignon, by Stiglitz, by Branko Milanovic, by Tony Atkinson, which is really the leader in the line of thought that Piketty has produced in recent years. On the issue of measurement, let me say that I think we have quite a significant amount of measures that exist, and probably to work with them in a consistent fashion is probably the way to go forward. But there are gaps. There are important gaps, in particular in the quality of data for low-income countries, that has to be significantly improved, and probably in some of the specific measures that we want to work with. So there is, of course, first of all, international inequality, of which generally speaking, we speak of whether there is inequality in per capita incomes, but also very importantly in human development, where the convergence in or lack of convergence in education and health have been at the center of the international debates for some time. And then in domestic inequality, we start, of course, with the Gini coefficient and the Palma ratio, which are both based on household surveys, as well as the very important indicator of the 1%, or the income received by the top 1%, and sometimes the 0.1%, which is a much better indicator, particularly of capital income, and how much they concentrate a high proportion of income. There are also important indicators that are already being produced in human development. The inequality adjusted human development indicator that the UNDP has been producing for some time, I think is a very, very interesting indicator, which is, by the way, not very widely quoted. but I appreciate that work significantly, and I think has been a significant advance in the literature on human development. And there are many other issues of inequality. I will underscore in particularly the issues associated with fiscal issues on taxation. I mean, what is the who pays for taxes? Let's say, but also the redistributive effect of government spending, which is and the net effect that taxes and spending have on different groups in the income distribution in countries. And there are, of course, many specific indicators that are also very important for issues. For example, the issue of access to education, access to health, access to formal employment, access to housing, access to financial services, on which there is a growing availability of data, but with significant gaps, particularly on the quality of the services that are provided to the poor, and how much inequality there is in the quality of the services. So this is probably an area where there has to be significant improvement in years to come. Now, aside from this, there are also, of course, the many indicators related to, particularly to gender inequality, which is, of course, a very important issue. Probably less so in many countries in terms of access to education, but significantly still in the access to formal employment, let's say, or the high levels of unemployment that women have, and the growing numbers, but still insufficient in terms of the unpaid work, which is a very important gender dimension that has come to be estimated in a few countries in the world, particularly a few developing countries. Developed countries have had more data on that for some time. Let me say that I'm not equally aware of how many indicators are equally available of ethnic groups. For example, in societies where there have been there are indigenous communities, or there is a significant amount of black population that comes from a historical legacy of slavery, and of course subject to discriminations of different forms. There are, of course, countries that do produce that data, but that's an equally important inequality indicator that we should look at. Now, the most important element of this project is, of course, how this information is going to be used to evaluate the activities of international organizations on the one hand, and to suggest how to move forward in terms of their work. And let me say in that regard that of course the most crucial issues in the debate relate to two specific topics. The first one is the effects of austerity policies, which has been a heated subject of controversy for a long time in developing countries, and interestingly in recent times in developed countries too, particularly in peripheral Europe. And that relates to how much the adjustment processes in the fiscal accounts generate, the additional taxes or the reduced spending affect different groups in society, and how to design better fiscal adjustments in terms of the distributive effect. And the second issue that I want to underscore is the issue of structural reforms. Structural reforms had been a heated issue, again, for a long time. Back, you can say, to the debt crisis of Latin America in the 1980s, but also to the transition to capitalism of the Central and Eastern European countries in the 1990s, the Asian crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And there are, of course, many debates on that regard. Let me say labor market reforms have been a particular subject of attention and controversy, but also financial liberalization and what effects that has, including capital account liberalization, which is of course a very, very important tool. Now, in terms of the policy, I think how to do those things better. That is, austerity policies when they are necessary, and structural reforms is a part of the agenda, but also very specific issues. For example, how to design education policies, health policies, particularly to have quality access to services by the poor, but also financial liberalizations, and what are the relations between those and the current institutions. For example, there is probably a very strong linkage between social protection, which includes health and pensions, and formal employment, and what policies can be implemented that de-link social protection from formal employment, and what is the type of institutions that are better at providing financial services, which may not be the commercial banks, but maybe credit unions, maybe public sector banks, maybe other institutions that we can think of. Finally, let me just make a few remarks on some issues that relate to international cooperation, but they may have significant effects on inequality. And let me underscore three in particular. The first one is international tax cooperation, because the avoidance and evasion of taxes is generally very regressive. And regressive in the sense that the rich do not pay taxes as much as they should, but also that forces countries to adopt tax reforms that overburden the lower incomes of society. The second is capital account issues. I mean, there is a significant awareness, with work with the IMF being extremely relevant in this regard, that there is a lot of volatility in capital flows. And that relates that generates significant effects. For example, booms, bust cycles that do have significant inequality inducing effects, particularly during the crisis. So what is the sort of international cooperation that can be built in that regard? And third is the social standards that we want to promote. And let me say in that regard that one of the interesting trends in recent years has been this concept of the social protection floors. But on top of what is the social protection floor that are best to promote, what other social standards we should be advancing as part of this new inequality, this agenda to reduce inequality in the world. Well, thank you very much, and again, I regret not to be present in person in this very important seminar. Thank you.